إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بشيرا ونذيرا وصلوات عليه وعلى أهله وأصحابه أجمعين. يقول الله في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. ويقول أيضا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Indeed, all praise and thanks belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Lord of the worlds. We seek refuge in Allah from the evil within ourselves and from the evil consequences of our actions. Whomsoever Allah guides, no one can misguide them. And whomsoever Allah allows to be misguided, no one can guide them straight again. I bear witness that there is no one worthy of worship except Allah alone, and that Prophet Muhammad is his last and final messenger. May the peace and blessings be upon him, his family, and his companions altogether. We remind all of us and ourselves from the verses that we recite every Friday, O you who believe, fear Allah as He deserves to be feared, and do not leave this world except that you are in a state of Islam. And we also remind ourselves with the famous verses, O you who believe, fear Allah, and speak a straightforward word. Speak justly and stand up for truth and justice. Perhaps if you do so, Allah will direct you to do good deeds, and He will take care of your affairs. And whomsoever obeys Allah and His Messenger, that indeed they would have gained the greatest of all achievements. My dear brothers and sisters, our khutbah today starts with a dream of Umar radiallahu anhu, Umar al-Faruq, the great man that he was, that we know him to be, a man of justice, a man who sacrificed his own pleasures for the sake of the goodness and reform of the ummah. And many can be said about Umar radiallahu anhu al-Faruq. But in this particular instance, it starts off with a dream of his, where he dreams that there's going to be a child with a scar on his eye that is going to bring justice in the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And Umar doesn't understand the dream fully, but he knows this child is comprised of two major families. The family of Banu Umayyah, which is the family of Abu Sufyan, Muawiyah, and that likes, and those tribes, and his own family. And he couldn't understand how these families combined. They had been going their separate ways. But subhanallah, he forgets about the dream. And as he's patrolling the streets on one occasion, as he usually does at night to make sure no one needs anything, because he felt he was responsible as someone with authority, he would go himself in the streets to ensure that no one needed anything. And so one occasion he went out at night while it was raining, and he sought to seek shelter next to a home. And as it's in the middle of the night, no one's really on the streets. He's resting because he's tired, and he hears a conversation inside the home. The conversation is between a mother and her daughter. The mother is saying to the daughter, add water to the milk, so tomorrow when we sell it, we can get more for it. So the daughter replies back and says, Amir al-Mu'mineen just gave a khutbah, and he called this cheating to dilute the product. And she says, but Amir al-Mu'mineen is not here. And she says, but the Lord of Amir al-Mu'mineen is watching. Allah is watching. So Umar heard that it was decreed that Umar be there at the time of her statement. Umar made a mark at the door, and he went back. And he looked at his sons. Which one of them needed to be married? His son Asim ibn Umar was the only one not married. So he says, Asim, if I pick for you a bride, would you take her from me? He says, of course, father. I trust your judgment. Whoever you bring me, I will gladly take them as my wife. So Asim, he tells the Amir al-Mu'mineen, which house do you want me to go and knock and ask for their daughter hand in marriage? He says, I've put a mark on this house, on this street. Go to it, find out about the family, and seek their daughter in marriage if she's available. And Asim did that. He went out and found out that house belonged to a poor family. The husband had just died months before, and the wife was widowed, and the daughter was in her 20s, not married yet. This is a lesson for all the fathers. You know, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, تُنْكَحَ الْمَرْأَ عَلَى الْأَرْبَعَةِ, that the daughter or the girl is married for 4 things. The women, when we desire to seek them for marriage, we look for either beauty, we look for the lineage, we look for the wealth. But the Prophet said, look for the last, this is the best one, ad-deen, that she has akhlaq, and she has mannerisms, and she has the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a lesson that Umar is giving in the midst of the story. He's saying to his son, this is who I desire for you, my son. No matter what class she came from, her socioeconomic status and all of that. Because he is the son of who? Of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He is royalty, right? In the sense of the title. But of course, Umar did not indulge himself in these things. But nevertheless, he didn't prevent the status or the class difference to prevent him from seeking someone good that was going to be, insha'Allah, a mother for his children. And so the marriage consummated. And alhamdulillah, Umar was hoping that that dream he had was going to take place with the birth of the grandchild, right? That Asim and this particular female was going to yield a boy that was going to fulfill the prophecy of Umar's dream. But subhanAllah, it turned out to be a girl. Her name was Layla. And Layla, as the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, sometimes Allah decrees girls. Just like the mother of Maryam. She wanted a son to dedicate for Allah, but what did Allah give her? He gave her Maryam. And Maryam then gave birth to Isa. So sometimes Allah decrees it, not in your lifetime, but maybe in the next generation. That's what happened. Umar died, radiallahu anhu. As we know, he was assassinated. And he never got to see what was going to come from this marriage in terms of that prophecy being fulfilled. But one day, what happened is the family of Muawiyah, they had a nephew. His name was Abdul Aziz. And he is the son of the famous Khalifa Marwan, who took over after Yazid. So now the Umayyad dynasty has taken over the Muslim empire. And Marwan has 2 sons. One is the crown prince, Abdul Aziz, and the other one is Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik now is the one next in line to be king. And Abdul Aziz is just a brother of the one that's going to be king. So Abdul Aziz wants to marry someone. He goes to who he knows to be righteous in Medina. He goes to Abdullah bin Umar, who is the brother of Asim. Asim, the father of Layla, has died. The only one in charge of this girl now is Abdullah bin Umar. So he goes up to him, as he's a famous faqih, a scholar in Medina, Abdullah bin Umar. And he says, Abdul Aziz says, I want Layla to get married to Layla. And so this was a great occasion. They finally combined the 2 families. And this is slowly becoming the prophecy of Umar radiallahu anhu. The family of the royalty of the Umayyad dynasty is seeking to marry into the family of Umar radiallahu anhu. So Abdul Aziz marries Layla, who is the granddaughter of Umar radiallahu anhu, and then they have a son named Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And this is the man we want to talk to you about today. Umar, the son of Abdul Aziz, the son of Marwan, the son of Yazid, the son of Umayyah. Now, what is so special about Umar Abdul Aziz? Safwan al-Thawri, a big scholar of that time, he says, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is a mujaddid of our ummah. He is the reformer of this ummah. He is part of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, even though there was many gaps between the last Khalifa, who was considered the rightly guided Khalifa, who was who? Ali, and some say Hassan. This is the end of that reign of Khulafa al-Rashidin, when the Prophet said, follow my sunnah and the sunnah of these rightly guided caliphs, it ends at Hassan. But yet the scholars include Umar in this. Why? Because of how much justice and reform he brought to the ummah. What's the story of Umar? Umar, as a young boy, his father is the governor of Egypt. He says, I want to be like my grandfather, Abdullah bin Umar. I want to be a scholar. So Abdul Aziz sends a letter to the governor of Medina, and he says, I want you to take care of him. I want him to learn and to be a scholar in Medina. All I want him to do is learn. So Umar was spoiled. He's the son of the governor and the nephew of the sultan, right, of the ummah. And so he has these personal guards, hairbrushers, money coming in, 1,000 dinars a month. So he's spoiled. Someone cannot truly learn under these conditions, because we know when you want to truly seek knowledge, there must be some uncomfortableness. You have to get out of your comfort zone. Sometimes when you indulge in all this luxury, you can't acquire the knowledge that you need, right? Especially the one that's not informational, the one that's actually about adab, They used to sit with scholars, not merely to get the collection or collect information, but to see the behavior of the scholars. How do they smile? When do they smile? When do they give a silence? When do they talk? All of this is the kind of things you learn under the feet of the scholar. If it was just information, we could open up a book and anybody could collect the information. So he wanted his son to have this in his life. Unfortunately, because of all the luxuries, he learned and learned. He was young. He was only 12 or 13. When he got to about 20, some of the teachers said, he's not coming to Salah. He's late for Salah. And when he comes, he says, my hairbrusher was brushing my hair. So they couldn't see the growth in Umar in that sense, to be a scholar. And so his father called him back to Egypt. And he decided in Egypt he wanted to get married. So he wrote a letter to his brother. And right before they were going to marry him, his father dies. So now his uncle, who is the Sultan, feels bad for him and he wants to gift him. He says, I want you to marry my daughter Fatima. So he marries Fatima and he brings him to Asham. In Asham, his father and the Umayyad dynasty, and this is the point, had been plagued with indulgence. They used to basically take from the wealth of the Ummah to themselves. Personal trips, going here and there, spending on all the family. They abused the power. And at first, Umar didn't understand what was going on. He wanted to enjoy the luxuries. He had been in Medina for so long. He now finally made it to the palaces. And so he would be one of them. He would spend money in his clothes, spend money on luxurious things. He bought his wife many golds, and she was the daughter of Khalifa as well. So he lived that life also for a number of years. And then he said, I want to be in power. I want to also feel what it feels like to be in charge. So he asked his uncle to be in charge of something. So his uncle said, I'll send you back to Medina. You know it very well. You were there. You're going to be a governor of Medina. And so he went back to be a governor of Medina. And at this time, the uncle passed away. The son, Al-Walid, who is the cousin of Umar, takes over. And so in Medina, what's happening to Umar? Umar is wanting to rule by power and force. So he hears about a potential uprising of a man that belonged to the family of Zubair. And this, they had been clashing with each other, the Umayyad dynasty and the Zubair family. So he wants to also show his uncle that I can do like my uncle, or his cousin, I can do like him. So he jails this man named Khubayb. Khubayb goes to jail unjustly, without a hearing, without a sentence. Jubail is sitting in jail for potential suspect, being a potential suspect. So a friend of Umar comes to him and he says, Umar, what have you done? This man has done nothing wrong and you have jailed him. He says, so what? I heard that he potentially was conspiring against me. He says, but it's not been proven and you have not been just with him. And so after a while, Umar began to think and he says, you know what? Let me go and free him. When he went to go free him, Khubayb had died. Khubayb died in the prison, and that changed completely the life of Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. He says, from that time, I didn't think about anything except the judgment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I was afraid from this sin and I changed my life completely. Inshallah, after the short break, we're going to see how Umar's life transformed, to see the point, inshallah, of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends from his story. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى أهله وأصحابه أجمعين. The ayah that came to Umar's mind, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم والوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وأن تولوا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. The ayah that shook Umar is, O you who believe, be bearers of justice with Allah, even if it be against yourselves, your families, your parents even, or your children. Even if they be poor or rich, always stand up for justice. And when you rule with justice. This ayah became the banner of his life. Much later, after this happened, he removed and resigned himself from being the governor of Medina, and he went back to live with his cousin, Al-Walid. Al-Walid, he became his confidant. And Walid, we used to do things that were wrong. And at that time on, Umar never held his tongue, always speaking the truth. One time Al-Walid says, what do you think of my governors, Umar? He says, they're all dhalimun. They're all wrongdoers. They're oppressing the people. They're taking wealth unjustly. And so Walid got upset at him and he distanced him. Walid then dies and Sulaiman takes over. Sulaiman's another cousin of his. And Sulaiman appreciated the truth of Umar. And he said, I want you to be close to me. Now, there is no real pathway to Umar being Khalifa because he's a cousin, right? Because Sulaiman has children. So it's not unimaginable that Umar one day will become the Khalifa of the Muslims. But while he is an advisor, he's always telling Sulaiman to do the right thing. He's saying it's not right for you to take the wealth unjustly. It's not right for you to charge taxes. They used to charge taxes to the non-Muslims. Non-Muslims who'd volunteer to be Muslims, they would have to pay jizya. And so some of them decided to be Muslim to avoid the jizya. So what happened? The Umayyad dynasty said, we don't want that because they'd rather have the money coming in. And so Umar said that was wrong. One time a will was written by Sulaiman or his father. He says, I don't want this daughter to have anything in my will. And Umar said, that's wrong for you to do. That's haram. And he says, this is what I've wrote. And then Umar says, well, this is what Allah wrote. Right? And now you could see the life of Umar changing. And then upon the death of Sulaiman had a young boy named Ayub who was supposed to take over. But unfortunately, Ayub dies before Sulaiman. And Sulaiman is on his deathbed. And he asks his closest advisors, who do you think could be the next Khalifa? Because it could be his younger sons, it could be his younger brothers. But the advisors knew none of them was fit. They advised him. They said, if you want Allah to protect you in your grave, stop this passing on of the Khalifa from son to son. You must give it to Umar. Umar is the most righteous one amongst you. And so Sulaiman said, this is the one thing that I was going to do before I die, that I hope Allah would be pleased with me. He wrote in a letter, secretly gave it to his advisor, and he says, I want you to read this upon my death, that the one who's going to take over after me is Umar. And everybody was going to be surprised, especially the Umayyad family, because they expected one of them to take in charge. Umar didn't know. No one knew. When Sulaiman passed away, the advisor came and he says, are you going to give allegiance to whoever's name is written on this letter? And they all said, yes, we pledge allegiance, thinking it was one of them. And then he opened the letter and it said, the next Khalifa of the Ummah is Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And they all were shocked. They all couldn't believe it. That for the first time it hadn't been passed to either a son or a brother, but a cousin, a distant cousin at that. And so Umar, that was his first opportunity. He only ruled for 2 years and 5 months. But in these 2 years, what did he do? SubhanAllah, the Ummah never saw justice like this. It was the golden age for justice and reform. Immediately, he removed all the governors that used to take advantage of their authority and replaced them with people who feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He himself gave up all his luxuries in order to show and to lead by example. That if I'm going to change our Ummah for reform, I have to start with myself. Right? They say, be the change you want to see. He lived by that principle. All the jewelry that the father had given, his father-in-law had given to his daughter, which is his wife, he told her to give it up. And at first she was hesitant. You know, she lived in luxury all her life. And he says, either you pick the jewelry or you pick me. And she gave it up and she picked to be with Umar. His kids wouldn't even have anything of luxury. He would make them work for everything. And when he wanted something, he would pay from the salary that he received in order to get something for himself, like honey. Once he was talking with a man, and they had the oils that used to light the lamps. And as they're talking about the affairs of the nation, and then it slowly turned into personal talk, he turned off the lights. So the man said, why did you turn off the lights? He says, because before we were talking about the Ummah. So this is part of the wealth of the Ummah that I'm using to light up the place that we're sitting at. But when we began to talk personally, I didn't want to use any of the wealth of the Ummah. So he turned it off. And the jizya that had been unfairly taxed to the non-Muslims, he removed it. He only placed whatever was in the Sharia of Allah, removing all unnecessary tax and all tariffs so that people could trade freely and there would be no injustice. A man, a general of his, entered Samarkand, which is modern day the area of Bukhari and Uzbekistan, that area. And so you're supposed to give them 3 days. That was the system of the Muslims, to give 3 days before entering and conquering, because you give them options. You become Muslim or you pay jizya, and we'll give you time to make that decision. But this general entered right away. And so the judge of Samarkand wrote to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and he says, your general has wronged us. And so Umar looked into this matter. He gave it to his judge to look into it. And the judge says, the judge in Samarkand is correct. Our general has wronged them. And so he ordered, for the first time, never has been done in history, he ordered the army who had already conquered Samarkand to leave out of Samarkand, to get out and give them the 3 days again. SubhanAllah, once the army removed themselves, the people of Samarkand said, this is unbelievable justice. We will become Muslim willingly. This is the kind of reform that changed their minds. At the first year of his rule, there was so much surplus because of the, tightening up on the corruption and the fraud that existed in the Ummah from centuries of the Umayyads abusing their power. He began to look for people to receive zakah. Some regions had no one because of the surplus that existed within the Ummah. And what did he begin to do? He began to form hotels on the highways because of this extra money. Anybody who's traveling and needs a place to stay, he was the first one to design this concept of these highway hotels. And then they said, there's no one else to receive the money. He says, I want you to give a stipend to all the scholars to collect hadith. And that's why they say this is the golden age. The Muwatta of Imam Malik was founded in this golden period of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And so what happened? The Ummah was flourishing. He wrote letters to the Rajas of India, asking them to accept Islam and their wealth would be protected. 7 of them responded by accepting Islam. He wrote from Al-Maghrib, the governor of Maghrib wrote to Spain, and they became to enter Islam. Even though his own household was suffering, he wouldn't eat unless he purchased it from the money he earned himself. And his family, all his children, all his women, he only had 2 thobes toward the end of his life. This is a man who used to indulge in buying silkware and perfume and all of these things. Towards the end, they said they could see his ribs, how little he ate. All because of that time he imprisoned Khubayb, thinking, I have to make up for this. I have to change my life and bring Islah from the fasad that I once was indulged in. And because of his justice toward the end of his life, we'll close with this, the governors couldn't take it, some of them, especially the Umayyad family, so they poisoned him. They paid 1,000 dinars to one of his pourers of juice or water, servant of his inside the palace, to put poison in his drink, and he was poisoned. And as he's dying, he makes a statement and he says, Oh Allah, I hope that I am forgiven for what I have done, and I hope I will be saved from the fire. And it is said, the ayah that was recited at the time of his death, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, Tilka darul akhirah. This is the true abode, the abode of the akhirah. نَجْعَلُهَا لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُرِيدُونَ عُلُوًّا فِي الْأَرْضِ. We make it for those who don't want to ascend in this world. وَلَا فَسَادًا وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And they do not want mischief, and the end is for the pious, the people of taqwa. So many lessons we could learn from the story of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, my dear brothers and sisters. The first is to be good. Whenever you do something good sincerely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as that lady behind closed doors did, subhanallah, Allah brought about a great grandson that was going to be a reformer of the ummah. That a father for his son wants a good person, not seeking beauty, lineage, money, but seeking akhlaq, deen. That is the best present you can give to your children, to pair them up with good people. And at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses those who live a life of truth. Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, kunu ma'as sadiqeen. Be with the truthful. Live your life in truth, even if you don't have in this world. Allah will please you. Allah will give you until you are truly satisfied. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us good in this world and in the hereafter, to make us people who stand up for justice and truth, to live a life of justice and truth. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us that which will benefit us and to continue to benefit us with that which He has taught us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give shifa, healing to all who are sick, and to give mercy to all those who have passed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to be with our brothers and sisters in Gaza through these difficult times. We ask Allah to remove from them the distress and the occupation. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give our brothers in Syria success in their endeavors and to make them an example for the ummah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wherever there are people who need your help, to please answer their du'as, Allah, and please remove the distress that is afflicting them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those all who are in debt to please free them from their debt. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all those who seek marriage, to allow them to get married. We ask you, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have mercy on all of us, particularly our parents who have raised us with mercy. We ask you, O Allah, to elevate their status and to enter them at the highest level of paradise. We ask you, O Allah, to guide us and to forgive us. Allahumma ighfir lil muslimin wal muslimat wal mu'minin wal mu'minat al ahya minhum wal amwat. Subhanaka rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillah rabbil alamin. After the salah, inshallah, we just have some announcements, so if you could remain seated after salah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح